that person just snapped. They just over time seem to get more and more irritable, just a mood dysregulation. So you might notice heavier bleeding, menstrual cycles that are a little bit close together or they're very long. A lot of clots are happening during a menstrual cycle. A lot of abdominal pain may be going on, more so than what you expect. Everything has been short-circuited. And this is where you hear some of those stories of women who walked off of a building or did horrible things to the children. And what supports a cancer growth generally tends to be something that supports its blood supply or feeds nutrients to the tumor, and the tumor grows and it needs a blood supply to do so. And so if we can contain the amount of minerals or copper in particular for being supportive of tumor growth.
And then the copper IUDs?
Oh, direct. Why is it copper IUD? Why isn't it some other IUD? Because the copper IUD produces inflammatory changes in the lining of the uterus that will prevent implantation of the little egg.
I had a clean smear. I got a copper IUD. 6 months later, I had precancerous cell changes and I had to get surgery to get it removed. And that was that copper.
Absolutely.
You have seen parents who come in a couple of months too late and their child commits suicide, their adult child commits suicide. You've seen people go into the ER because of copper toxicity. And
yes.
You know,
thinking that copper is a good thing. I've seen at least 3 or 4 cases where we said, do not do that. And every single one of them ended up in the ER with, psychosis of some kind. A lot of folks are really misreading these hair analysis. First of all, you have to think of it as every single mineral or metal on that hair analysis has its unique story. And just because, say, you see something that looks like it's really high, believe it or not, that could be just the opposite of what's going on.
I owe you an apology, and I'm making up for it in this podcast. It's a mini-series, and I'm going to tell you why I feel sorry. I'm sorry. Because I haven't talked enough about how binge eating disorders, anxiety, depression, mood swings, severe aggression, endometriosis, and the risk for cancer is huge in autism and ADHD moms. And the same things that gave your child the symptoms, ADHD symptoms and autism symptoms, can cause different as problematic symptoms in you. I am bringing Judy Bowman to you now in a mini-series, and in this episode we're going to talk about copper and zinc and mood. We're also going to talk about the foods and the supplements that you are probably taking and eating right now that is increasing the risk for all these mental and physical issues that I just mentioned. We're talking about copper IUDs, we're talking about hair mineral tests and analysis, and testing for zinc and copper, and how those tests almost always mean the opposite of what you're told. And that is dangerous because it's making moms really ill. It's making moms sick, die before their time, and unhealthy mentally as well. So welcome to Dr. Judy Bowman, who is an MD. She specializes in autism, ADHD, and mental health issues. She is a medical doctor and she founded Mensah Medical in Chicago together with Dr. Albert Mensah. These are some of the doctors that I work with and some of the only ones that I recommend working with as well. And she is an expert in women's health, and she's now here to talk to you about yours.
Dr. Judy Bowman, welcome to this podcast.
Thank you so much.
It's such a joy to have you. You know, I always say that there are 2, maybe 3, if I'm generous, doctors and clinical practices that I personally go to and will take my children to, and Mensah Medical and you are one of them. So it's a real honor to be able to bring your wisdom to the world, because there are not a lot of people who know and understand what we're about to talk about today.
I'd like to thank you for that. We are more than honored to participate, and we really need to get the word out. We do.
We do. And we are going to talk about children and autism and ADHD, but the focus today is going to be more on the moms, because this is a topic that is underrated and misunderstood, basically.
I would agree.
A lot of these moms, would you say we have the same issues as our children, and we don't understand because we're so desperate to save our children when they are eloping, they're screaming, they are eating paper, they don't sleep at night, they're aggressive. We see they are not developing speech. Naturally, that puts you under stress and pressure. But that and the biochemistry can actually lead to a lot of the things that we as autism moms and women deal with: cancer, depression, anxiety, hormonal issues, mental health issues, and stress. So we're going to dive into that, and it's such exciting and important topics. So could we just pinpoint what are some of the signs of estrogen dominance and copper toxicity or copper overload?
Absolutely. Such a great point. So you might notice heavier bleeding, menstrual cycles that are a little bit too close together, or they're very long. A lot of clots are happening during a menstrual cycle. A lot of abdominal pain may be going on, more so than what you expect. Monthly cycles are not comfortable anyway, but this goes a little bit over the top. You also might notice a change in mood. And we all don't like this idea of someone kind of noticing that once a month you seem to be a little more moody, or what's going on with you. You're more agitated, irritable, or you seem extremely depressed. What is happening? Well, very often this is effect of what's going on for the estrogen dominant female. So you get these mood manifestations along with physical manifestations. And these are also, understand this, these are also the women that tend to have fibroid tumors, okay, endometriosis, once again, heavy menstrual cycles, along with mood dysregulation. All that tends to happen if you're estrogen dominant. And the reason really is the genetic predisposition. But every month, starting with the first menstrual cycle that a female has, the set point for copper baseline amount in your body tends to creep up little by little. And it's an insidious process that over time, it gets to a point where the baseline is higher than usual. Okay. Mm-hmm. And it seems like we'll get complaints about, oh, something just seemed to happen. That person just snapped. They just over time seem to get more and more irritable, just a mood dysregulation. And what's been happening? It's been happening over time. And it finally got to that point where things started to manifest.
Just interrupting quickly. Sorry, I just needed to say to you that I am currently running a group coaching program, and in that program, you will learn how to understand your symptom triggers and your child's symptoms triggers, and get yourself and your child to less symptoms, more independence, better sleep, better mood, more balance, no binge eating, no addictions to food, no anger outbursts, and self-sabotage and procrastination. Imagine becoming an expert in all the things that we are talking about here: undermethylation, zinc, copper, bio-individual nutrition, as well as getting yourself to a really healthy place so that you can be a great mom, you can sleep through the night, you can feel balanced in your mood and in your metabolism, in your weight, in your sleep, and your energy levels as well. So those are the things that I teach moms to become experts in by lived experience, because we can only help our children and heal our children and change our children to the level that we heal, change, and understand ourselves. So this is a group-based curriculum with coaching sessions, monthly coaching sessions, where you go through the same journey that I went through. It just took me 8 years to get my son from stimming, screaming, eloping, sleepless nights, rigidity, aggression, and myself from anxiety, depression, and mood swings, and sugar addiction, and self-sabotage, and just depression. But I've compressed that process, that curriculum, down to a 5-step process that takes most moms between 6 and 12 months. I have a couple of free spots at the time of this recording, and if you want to be considered for one of those 2 spots, you will learn all the things that Dr. Bowman is talking about here as well from the best autism practitioners, because if you don't understand this by lived experience, if you don't become an expert in reading your child's symptoms and adjusting diet and nutrition and lifestyle accordingly, you become super dependent on experts for life. So this is a really key component in your child's turnaround process. But if you want to be considered, send me an email, contact@barefootautismwarriors.com, or go to the episode page for this podcast at barefootautismwarriors.com, or click on program on barefootautismwarriors.com. Now back to the interview.
I had mentioned postpartum psychosis. This is the very worst of the worst in terms of copper dysmetabolism and accumulation, to the point that every nerve in your body, and you know where the majority of them are, they're in a brain area, okay, is affected by the amount of additional or extraneous free radical copper is there. And so that's going to affect your mood and demeanor and physical function. The worst case being total dysregulation of neurotransmitters and her thought processes, whether it's trying to do a math problem or trying to figure out her way through the day, are simply just sabotaged. Everything has been short-circuited. And this is where you hear some of the horrible stories of women who walked off of a building, or, did horrible things to the children. I mean, the stories can get pretty gross, but it's not because she's trying. Her brain has totally short-circuited, and it's not sending messages anywhere that they need to go, except for the horrible things that can happen. So
yeah, and that's where someone gets extremely, like in a middle spectrum, gets extremely angry and anxious or panic attacks. When I look at my life and my reactions, it's like things don't match.
Exactly. And the thing about it, most women, most people know what good feels like. They've experienced it sometime. We hope so, but then they turn around and they look at themselves and say, what is happening? This is not me. This is not the person that I know, that I grew up with. Why can't I manage things the way I was managing? What is so different about myself now that has provoked this kind of a change? And it's very alarming. It's disconcerting. And so then you seek to find help wherever you can get it. And very often what happens? You end up in your psychiatrist's office, your psychologist's office, your primary care doctor, and you're treated for whatever's going on, whether it's anxiety, whether it's panic disorder, whether it's major depression. All those things can manifest because of that.
Yeah.
And yes, there's help for it. The bottom line is we're trying to get to the core of what's really going on. So through a lot of testing, we can find out where the biochemistry is and how to correct it. Some things there's too much of, i.e. copper. Some things there's too little of, maybe B6 and zinc, and there's other things also to be looked at, but those things can be balanced, and it's called biochemical individuality. Every woman's not the same. It's not going to be at the same level. And so once you can sift out what's going on with her, then you can manage. It's evidence-based, practice that we do.
Yeah, and it's definitely something that's made a massive difference for me. This exact approach and your approach when it came to anxiety out of the blue, anger out of the blue. But I also experienced breast cancer, and I also had a heart attack. Could you touch on, so first of all, thank you for liberating women from the shame about the behavior, because no one's thinking, okay, this is actually a biochemical, nutritional thing.
It's hard to connect dots. Yes.
It's and that's really important for women to know. So with that, looking at some of the things that are leading to autism and ADHD that aren't talked about, that we can then segue into talking about mom's health. If we start with the role of zinc and B6 and copper when it comes to these issues, what's most important for you to say to moms out there?
Well, first of all, the first thing I think of when you think about zinc and B6, a lot of people don't know that, but those two, I can't call them elements, but minerals and elements, if you want to call them that, are so important for neurotransmitters. You cannot make neurotransmitters. And what does that mean, really? Things that give you calm when you need to be calm. The idea of feeling overwhelmed and anxious, if you don't have the right amount of neurotransmitters on board, your ability to even calm yourself in a what I call a timely manner may either be prohibited or just not possible, and you really can't manage well. So that might lead to an emotional response, an inappropriate response, and that's not really what you want. There's also, in terms of women particularly, there's this copper issue. What the heck does that mean? And let's not talk rocket science here, okay? Everything that you plug into a socket has a copper wire in it. Let me just start with that. Why is that? Why the heck is copper so important? It's a great transmitter of electrons, of electricity. Electricity, as you know, makes things work, hypes things up. You can't live without it. And the physical part of ourselves really needs it to really talk to nerves. Okay. So when someone is or something is getting on your nerves, you're fired up. Okay. And once again, how you respond could be a bit overwhelming. You know, there's this idea of mountain versus molehill. Well, everything becomes a mountain as opposed to a small hill that you can manage. And so by the time that you have your neurotransmitters out of whack, put it like that, not enough to give you an ability to calm yourself in a timely manner, not enough to give you an overall sense of well-being to have you respond appropriately, and then you turn on the electrons with high copper, we have a situation where mood and demeanor and calming are just going to be very challenging. Think about it. If you have other things going on in your household, whether it's kids or just situations, it becomes difficult to manage. And if you don't put yourself in the appropriate balance, then you get on this spiral that just goes out of control. You know, this is not what you want for a mom.
That's so important. We want to talk about that because copper, that's one thing. So let's just be honest. There's a lot of talk about copper. People are about root cause protocol. They are being told to take copper and stop taking vitamin D. And
Yes.
a lot of women are taking copper supplements because it is in all the hair growth and beauty products. And we have it in our birth control products as well.
Absolutely.
So what happens if you're a mom who's already anxious, if you're a mom who's already sensitive and you're already feeling overwhelmed and stressed and in fight and flight, and you add this into the mix before we even start to talk about being B6 and B6 depleted, what are we dealing with here?
Oh, we're dealing with so much. First of all, let me make it perfectly clear. I'm not saying no one needs copper. No, you cannot live without it. Okay. The bottom line is, when is it too much? When is there not enough? But mostly for women, it's a matter of when is there too much. What folks forget is that copper is one of those metals that actually has to be controlled and released as it is needed and used when it is needed. But when it's in overkill, can cause some very, very horrible situations. The very worst that we know about, of course, is postpartum psychosis, but I'll get to that in a little bit. There's another protein. There's a protein called ceruloplasmin now that becomes very, very important. And if you make enough of that protein, and this is the protein that binds, and understand the term, free copper, the free radical, the charged particle. Charged particles need to have, and they need to be disciplined. In other words, ceruloplasmin tends to be the protein that binds this free radical. and keeps it out of trouble, so to speak, keeps it from damaging your tissue, keeps it from hyping up your responses and taking your sympathetic nervous system heightened and raising your blood pressure. It is a mechanism that allows copper to be released slowly as it is needed, and a feedback mechanism. When you have too much, though, of that particular free radical just out and about, then you get damage and you get heightened responses. And so the bottom line is this. Some folks don't understand that if there's not enough ceruloplasmin around, and we'll talk about how you get that in your system, if there's not enough, then you have free radical copper basically just doing damage. That's what you have. And no, you can't live without copper. Copper is necessary for the production of blood vessels, okay? And Lord knows we need those because that's how you live. Now, in terms of women particularly, here's the idea. When a woman gets pregnant, and every month there is a menstrual cycle, the whole idea, there's a slow release of copper from its protein for the production of blood vessels in your uterine lining, such that if there's a fertilization that month, that little egg has something to nestle in with this rich blood supply produced by copper being around, okay? That's a beautiful thing. We're wonderfully made. And so it nestles in, and gosh, there's a baby growing who needs what? Blood vessels, absolutely, to grow and develop. And so that becomes extremely important. And that is one of the basic roles of why that is. Now, as the child grows, they get larger, they're still developing blood vessels, i.e., no blood vessels, no baby. And so this is a good system in order to keep a pregnancy. On the other hand, okay, here's the problem. Here's where it comes into play. Estrogen dominance. This is the major player here. The more estrogen is around, generally, the more copper one tends to accumulate, okay? And that depends on a genetic predisposition, okay? In other words, it kind of follows the female line, all right? And so if you are estrogen dominant, you may actually store a little more copper and have a little more of that get out of control than a person who just doesn't have that problem. It's not every single woman on the planet is going to have a copper overload. It is not like that at all. But
also, I want to mention that a lot of people do hair mineral analysis or tests to figure out if copper levels are high. And I would like you to touch on that before we talk about cancer and B6 and zinc deficiency being linked to this. Because as you have mentioned before, I think hair mineral analysis is not the way to go unless you really know how to do this, because they can show something completely different to what's actually going on. Could you talk to us about that?
Thank you for bringing that up, because a lot of folks are really misreading these hair analysis. First of all, you have to think of it as every single mineral or metal on that hair analysis has its unique story. And just because, say, you see something that looks like it's really high, believe it or not, that could be just the opposite of what's going on. It means that you may not be metabolizing that correctly, and it's being thrown off as waste. Sometimes that's what that means, as opposed to, oh gosh, it looks like copper is going off the charts. Well, no, it means that actually you're a pretty good excreter of it.
Yeah.
That's what that means. And so as opposed to something like zinc, okay, when zinc is off the charts, that means you are absolutely wasting it. It means that, oh, it's high in the hair, but it's low in the serum, which means that, oh, this is a problem, because then you can't use it to make neurotransmitters, okay? And so, and usually what we check is probably somewhere about, I don't know, 35 or 40 minerals and metals, and we will look at each individual mineral or metal separately and what it's saying. Then you have to look at the pattern of what is there, okay? Because there's a pattern that has to be looked at, as well as the actual number, high, low, normal, whatever it is. And so you have to be very, very careful with who is reading a hair analysis. And I really, other than, and I'm not toting my own gun here, but other than what I know, it's who taught me, is also one of the great people that can read a hair analysis accurately. And of course, that was Dr. William Walsh, who helped get started with some of the stuff. In fact, almost all of it.
Yeah.
And so I'm very cautious in reading those. So what we do, though, to really make it a little bit more, to give us a little bit more confidence with it, is we do hair blood, and urine. By the time that you have all three of those things acquired, and you are looking at what's being done with them, in other words, you're looking at the metabolism that kind of comes along with that, we have a pretty good idea, at least 99% confidence of what it is that we're seeing. I mentioned like low in serum copper, but high in the hair. That's a huge flag of what's going on. Or same thing for zinc, high in the hair, but low in the plasma. And so those kind of things we actually have to put together. It's not just look at it and, oh, this is high and this is low. No, there's a meaning, and there's combinations of certain minerals and metals that also tell a story. Because we can also look at that and see this is severe malabsorption versus not. This is a hypoglycemic person who drops their blood sugars episodically over the course of a day, and it's going to be more or less unpredictable. Put it like that. That's going to control also what's going on. You know, here's a person that didn't know they were exposed from their environment through the water, through occupation, with heavy metals. That's another sort of story. Okay, so hair analysis just need to be read by someone who really knows what's going on with that.
Yes, that's a really good point. Why is it that autism and ADHD moms, or women in families where that is an issue, are more likely to have fertility issues and breast cancer down the line? What can we do to prevent it? And what's the role of B6 and zinc?
Okay, I'm going to jump right into the cancer question because it's just really that kind of important. Once again, I talked about copper being necessary for the production of blood vessels. Well, the last thing that you want to support is a growing tumor. The last thing you want to support is even growing normal tissue that's out of control. And that's where you get fibroids or things like endometriosis happening. When you have that, when you have one particular cell that for whatever reason, something in the environment, Lord knows we can't really stop cosmic radiation, or someone who ate something that was carcinogenic, or some genetic disposition that decided to show up now, we don't need the support of cancer growth. We really don't. And what supports a cancer growth generally tends to be something that supports its blood supply or feeds nutrients to the tumor, and then the tumor grows and it needs a blood supply to do so. And so if we can contain the amount of minerals or copper in particular from being supportive of tumor growth, then I think the outcomes would be much, much better. Okay. Yeah, some things we cannot stop. Some things we don't know what to do with. I mentioned cosmic radiation. Yeah, it's a real issue. It is. Or maybe someone had some x-rays at some point in time, a bunch of CT scans for some other reason, who knows what. And that excited a few cells to kind of go awry. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, okay, fine. But if you can catch those kind of things early, there are things you can do to either slow the progress or eliminate, that whole condition. Breast tissue, uterine tissue, all of that are subject to female hormones. And this is where, once again, this estrogen dominance comes into play. So your estrogen dominant female does not metabolize and manage copper the way that it needs to be managed. And so then we have this surplus of copper coming into the system. And if there is some tissue that is looking for support for blood vessels that support a tumor, then we may be setting ourselves up for that particular scenario.
And what are some of the sources for copper that we need to stay away from? And why is it that zinc deficiency plays a role here?
Because copper and zinc can be buddies or they can be enemies. And neither one of them really needs to win too heavily. Too much of anything is a problem. Too little of anything is also a problem. If they have more or less kind of, and I don't want to have people thinking too hard about this copper zinc ratio, but I'm going to talk about it. But zinc and copper, if they're about balanced within their normal limits, okay, this is a good thing. The minute one rises above the other, let's say copper, it tends to suppress zinc. We have a problem now. Because once zinc is suppressed, okay, then this is where neurotransmitter regulation is not going to happen for you. Your ability to produce your own serotonin is not going to be enough to help you manage that problem. Your ability to produce gamma aminobutyric acid the calming neurotransmitter. Oh, can't calm down, can't make it, don't have enough zinc. Oh, we have an issue. Okay, your ability, oh, here's the big one. And I didn't mention this one, but this is a major player. Your ability, okay, to even produce dopamine. Oh, goodness. And that's your, oh, I won the lottery. We're feeling great with everything. Life is good. Couldn't be better. Not going to make that one at amounts that are going to be beneficial. But what you do with dopamine, here we go. If copper is high and dopamine is around, guess what you're going to produce? Adrenaline. Okay. It's now we've got panic happening and anxiety. And I mentioned earlier, sympathetic nervous system that revs you up, your adrenaline's high. Oh my gosh, what have we created here? Okay. And so this is a big issue.
Yeah.
It really is. Copper in the presence of dopamine doesn't stay dopamine. Dopamine turns into noradrenaline, and that turns into adrenaline. Powerful. Adrenaline will override every other neurotransmitter you have. And here comes panic and anxiety. Okay. And so I know it's kind of hard to, this is kind of full circle on how everything relates to everything else. But bottom line is it's all about balance.
Yeah.
It is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you said something at some point about you can actually completely crash the system with this adrenaline overload by having high copper and low zinc.
Absolutely. You're wonderfully made. Why is that? What's this thing about adrenaline anyway? Well, let's call it like it is. If the bear is chasing you through the woods, guess what's going to kick in above any other neurotransmitter? Adrenaline. Get the heck out of here. Your life is being threatened. Let's go. But this is an artificial scenario in terms of the neurotransmitter scene. This is one where there was estrogen dominance, copper comes into the system, your body does not know how to get rid of it and take it back to its baseline. And then, okay, something happens, copper goes up, too much, there's dopamine around. So whether it's too little or too much dopamine, doesn't matter. If copper is elevated, in everybody's medical school book, if you look, copper in the presence of dopamine takes it to a pathway of adrenaline. Okay. Yeah. And there's no bear, by the way. There's no bear chasing you. There's no dog chasing you. There's nothing going on. And all of a sudden, panic, where is that coming from? That's enough to be disconcerting by itself. You know, so over the years, there's treatment for this that is also not rocket science. Okay. So what do? And you mentioned things, diet, you mentioned, and we think that we're so smart sometimes with all of our wonderful, wonderful things to eat. And I'm being really healthy, you know, but believe it or not, copper's in your food. And there's some foods that have an awful lot of it, an awful lot of it. One of the first things you think of is, oh, man, I love my guacamole. I love avocados. Oh, they're so wonderful. And they're one of the most nutritional things that we have on this planet, you know. However, they're really loaded in copper. They really are.
And all the vegan, all the dairy alternatives. Super.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You also heard about almond milk, which is the rage these days. Also one of the highest foods, high in copper. That's where I'm trying to go with that. You know, it tastes good. Yeah, I like the idea. And you know what? If you don't have this problem of copper dysmetabolism, then you go right ahead because you're probably going to, you know, reap the benefits of all this. But if you are not one of those people, okay, and it's probably 50% of women, then you're going to have some issues.
Yeah.
Okay. So they're going to be related to high copper. And that's going to cause a cascade of issues. So let me give you at least 4 or 5 really high copper foods that should only really be taken in moderation. Okay. And that would be almonds, almond product, almond milk, almond flour, almond everything. Okay. The other one would be avocados. Okay. They're wonderful in terms of nutrition. I'm not dogging them out, but they are really high in copper. Another one, cashews, believe it or not, are also extremely high in copper. And there's some wonderful green leafy vegetables that are also very high in copper, but if you eat them sparingly, you're not going to get yourself in trouble. But things like kale, which is also the newer rage these days, and even spinach. Okay, so now let's put all this together. Let's have the typical, really wonderful, nutritious meal. Well, for lunch today, let's see, I had a full avocado over some wonderful leafy green vegetables, lots of spinach and lots of kales. And by the way, I had some almond shavings that I kind of sprinkled on top, you know, and you know what?
Anxiety.
Exactly. And I just love my almond milk. I have that, blah, blah, blah. Well, you do that every day, every other day, too often, or whatever it is. And what you're doing, if you happen to be that female with high copper in your system, and you can't get rid of it back to its baseline fast enough, what you're doing is accumulating that over time. And it's contributing to your source. It doesn't come from nowhere. You don't get it by just breathing the air. It's the soil, your environment, the food you eat, wherever it's coming from. Supplementing, if some of you were supplementing, okay, then that's going to add to it. What have we all done? We've taken our prenatal vitamins. They're high in copper because they do know that copper is necessary for blood vessels to be produced, and that the infant, the baby is going to need them. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that to a point.
Yeah.
Okay. And then it goes overboard.
And then the copper IUDs.
Oh, direct. Because they know what? Why is it copper IUD? Why isn't it some other IUD? Why is it the copper IUD? Because the copper IUD produces inflammatory changes in the lining of the uterus that will prevent implantation of the little egg. Okay.
I mean,
That's why
I had a clear smear. I got a copper IUD. 6 months later, I had precancerous cell changes, and I had to get surgery to get it removed. And that was that copper.
Absolutely. I have had more patients. And by the way, I'm just FYI, I'm not just talking out the seat of my pants here. I did women's health for a good 14 years or so. Some of it, of course, before knowing what I know now. And I look back at that and I think about, oh my goodness, all those stories. Where did that come from? I didn't know what I know now. And when I think about all of those things and what happens with copper dysmetabolism, females' hormones in general, and it all makes sense.
Let's just say things as they are, straight up. You have seen parents who come in a couple of months too late and their child commits suicide, their adult child commits suicide. You've seen people go into the ER because of copper toxicity. And
yes.
thinking
that copper is a good thing. I've seen at least 3 or 4 cases where we said, do not do that. And every single one of them ended up in the ER with, psychosis of some kind.
I hope it gave you a lot of aha moments and insights to listen to this podcast, episode 1. In the next episode, we are going to shock you because depression, rigidity, ADHD symptoms like procrastination, hyperfocus, perfectionism, OCD-like tendencies, addictions to sugar and scrolling and screens, and mood swings, and ambition where it just cannot get good enough. Like if you're someone who's always that A-type personality when it comes to helping your child in your career and in your life, and if you're someone who's quite controlling as well and rigid, did you know that 98% of all children with autism are undermethylated? And that comes from you. So it also increases the risk for cancer. And many of the things that we eat and do to stay healthy make matters worse when it comes to undermethylation. So you need to know about this if you have a child with special needs, because chances are that it's affecting you in different ways that you had no clue about. And there are certain foods that you can't eat when this is a case. You need to understand this. So tune in for the next episode. You can either subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening to it. Please give it a 5-star rating, write a comment, write to me on Facebook, Ninka-Bernadette Mauritson, or look for Barefoot Autism Warriors there. Send me an email, contact@barefootautismwarriors.com, or go to barefootautismwarriors.com and subscribe to one of my freebies to get notified when I publish the next episode. But subscribe on Spotify or iTunes or wherever you're listening, or YouTube, where I always publish the podcast episodes as well on the Barefoot Autism Warriors channel. So I'm excited to share with you again next time.